He always thought silence was protection, until he realized it was the reason he disappeared. 12 things he never should have said, and each one cost him a piece of himself. There are sentences that end lives long before death does, not with blood or violence, but with silence that follows them. You open your mouth, thinking honesty will heal, and you watch how your truth becomes the knife they hold against you later. I learned that the hard way. In my youth, I believed that truth was sacred. I thought if you speak from the heart, the world will open its arms. Foolish dream. The world doesn't want your honesty. It wants your mask, polite, convenient, harmless. The moment you speak without polishing your pain, you become too much. They call it sincerity until it cuts through their comfort. Then it becomes rudeness. I used to tell my patients, my students, even my own children, speak, don't hold it in. Years later, I realized I had been teaching them how to bleed in public. People don't want your truth. They want entertainment. They want to listen only if it makes them feel better about themselves. But raw truth, the kind that smells of loss and disappointment, they call it bitterness. There was a woman once, kind eyes, tired hands. She told me she had confessed everything to her husband, her fears, her doubts, her exhaustion, and he stopped looking at her the same way. He said I'd changed, she whispered, but I didn't change. I just stopped pretending. That's when it struck me. Sometimes the act of honesty is what destroys love, not because you lied, but because they loved the lie more than they ever loved you. Every human being carries a small museum of unspoken words. Some rooms must stay locked, not out of cowardice, but out of wisdom. When you tell your secret to the wrong person, it doesn't make you lighter. It makes you exposed, naked in a room full of people who don't know what it means to be cold. I've seen how oversharing becomes a disease. People rush to confess, to pour their hearts out to strangers online, to friends who can't hold silence for 5 minutes. They call it healing. I call it begging. Begging for validation, for someone to clap for your pain. But applause never replaces understanding. It just makes the emptiness louder. Silence is not weakness. It's a decision. The decision to protect the parts of yourself that others would only misuse. The decision to stop auditioning for love by revealing everything that hurts. Because the more you explain yourself, the less they respect you. The more you justify your worth, the smaller you become in their eyes. I remember an old friend once said, "You never say much about yourself." I smiled and told him, "That's why I still have peace." He thought I was joking, but peace is born in the things you stop defending. Some secrets are not meant to be shared, not because they are shameful, but because they are sacred. You don't tell everyone where your heart bleeds. You don't hand your vulnerability to someone who loves to analyze, gossip, or fix. There's strength in restraint. There's dignity in selective truth. So when they ask, "Why don't you talk about it?" I answer, "Because I've learned what words can destroy." Every truth has a price. The question is not whether you can tell it, but whether you can live with what follows. Silence is not emptiness. It's self-respect with a quiet voice. When you stop explaining, you start existing. There's a secret hidden deeper than this one most people never notice until it's too late. The next truth doesn't destroy through words. It destroys through smiles. It wears kindness like a mask, and by the time you realize it, the damage is already done. You'll understand in Part 2, some of the most dangerous people you'll ever meet won't scream, won't insult, won't raise a hand. They'll nod. They'll smile. They'll say, "I only want what's best for you." And you'll believe them until everything inside you is gone and you don't recognize your own reflection anymore. No one warns you about the people who ruin you with softness, not because their intent is kind, but because their control is quiet. They don't need to shout to take your power. They just need to make you feel like giving it up is your own idea. I've seen it too many times. A woman slowly shrinking in her marriage because her husband supports her dreams, as long as they don't take too much time. A son never moving out of his parents' home because they love having him there, while quietly poisoning his self-trust. A friend who always listens, but only so they can know which buttons to press next time. They wrap their control in affection. They weaponize concern. "I'm just worried about you." I didn't say no. I just said, "Maybe you're not ready." It's not criticism, it's love. Love should feel like freedom. If it feels like guilt, it's not love. There's something especially cruel about invisible cages. At least with cruelty, you know where the bars are. But when affection becomes a leash, you don't notice you're being trained to stay small. They say they're protecting you, but what they're really protecting is the version of you that doesn't threaten their comfort. And you, like a fool, thank them. Thank them for being there. Thank them for understanding. All the while you're editing yourself, biting your tongue, delaying your life. And the worst part? You think you're making those decisions freely. By the time you start to feel suffocated, you've already handed over your boundaries, one soft compromise at a time. You think back to when you stopped speaking up, when you started asking for permission instead of acting, when you needed approval before being yourself. You won't find one big moment. You'll find 100 little ones. That's how quiet manipulation works. It's not loud. It's polite. It makes you say thank you while you lose your voice. I once watched a woman walk away from the best opportunity of her life because her partner wasn't sure it was safe. She said, "He's just looking out for me." No, he was looking out for himself, for his comfort, for his routine, for the version of her that didn't grow past him. But she couldn't see it. The affection confused her. The mask was too well made. You think the enemy will be obvious. You wait for betrayal, for screaming, for some dramatic act. But the truth is, the people who destroy your life don't always mean to. They simply need you to stay small so they don't feel left behind. And instead of fighting, they convince you to stay with a smile. That's not care. That's quiet sabotage. Eventually, you realize the most dangerous kind of control is the one that makes you feel loved while slowly making you disappear. It's not always the loud voices that hurt you. Sometimes it's the soft ones that stop you from becoming who you are. If someone's love requires your silence, it's not love. It's obedience. The scariest manipulation doesn't feel like pressure. It feels like comfort you can't leave. And if you think this was the worst of it, you haven't heard the next one. What if I told you the next secret looks like strength, but it's actually a trap? It's the one we admire most, the one that slowly turns survival into self-destruction. You won't see it coming in part 3. If at least one of these secrets resonated with you, it means that you too remained silent when you wanted to scream. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other confessions. Here, people speak not with their voices, but with their hearts. And in the comments, write just one thing. Which of the don't tell anyone things did you say after all? And regret it? Your story could be someone else's liberation. Some lies don't come from others. You build them yourself, brick by brick, compliment by compliment, pain by silence. They call you strong, and you believe them. You nod, smile, swallow the tears, and wear the title like armor. Not because you don't feel, but because you've been taught that feeling out loud is a luxury. So you become the one who listens, the one who carries, the one who never breaks until you do. Quietly, where no one can see it. There's a kind of strength that looks admirable from the outside, but eats you alive from within. It's the strength of pretending, the strength of never needing help, the strength that never says, I'm tired, I'm scared, I need someone. People start to rely on you. They assume you're fine. You've always been fine. So they lean and lean and lean. And not once do they ask what's holding you up. They don't mean harm. They just forget. You trained them to forget. You taught them that your pain isn't urgent, that your needs can wait, that you're always okay, even when you're not. Eventually, you start lying to yourself too. You say, I'm built for this. I don't need anyone. I've handled worse. Maybe it's true, but truth doesn't always mean healing. Survival isn't the same as peace. You become addicted to being the one who copes. You measure your worth by how much you can endure. And in the quiet moments, when the room is empty and the mask slips, the cost hits you. You're exhausted, but you don't rest. You're hurting, but you don't ask. You're surrounded, but you're alone. They celebrate your strength, and you resent them for it. Not because they're wrong, but because they don't see the full picture. Strength has made you invisible, and the worst part? You help them do it. I've seen women burn themselves to keep others warm and call it love. I've seen men die a little every year just to be someone's anchor. I've seen daughters hold broken families together while no one ever asked how it felt to be the glue. And I've been that person too, the dependable one, the silent one, the strong one. I didn't cry at my mother's funeral. I comforted others instead. I didn't grieve a betrayal. I rationalized it. I thought that made me noble. It didn't. It just delayed the collapse. True strength isn't the absence of weakness. It's the ability to say, this is too much. I need a moment. I deserve care too. But saying that means risking your image, risking the way people see you. And for some of us, image was all we ever had. That's why this secret is so dangerous, because it rewards you while it destroys you. They give you praise while you bleed internally. They call you resilient while you bury your needs. And when you finally break, they're surprised. I never knew you were struggling. Of course they didn't. You made sure of it. This lie, the lie of unshakable strength, is one of the most respected prisons you'll ever live in. When your strength becomes your silence becomes your prison. Being the strongest in the room often means being the loneliest. You can either impress them or save yourself. You can't do both. What I'm about to tell you next, it's not about others. It's about the betrayal you commit against yourself, slowly, politely, without even realizing it. And that's the one that breaks everything. It begins with a small compromise. You cancel something you wanted. You stay quiet in a moment that mattered. You tell yourself it's not a big deal. Then you do it again and again, until one day you look at your life and realize most of it was built for someone else. The most dangerous betrayal is not what others do to you. It's what you do to yourself in their name. You betray your time to stay available. You betray your voice to keep the peace. You betray your boundaries to not hurt anyone, and eventually you betray your truth just to be loved. I've watched this slow erosion happen in the strongest, kindest people I've known, not because they were weak, because they were taught that being chosen matters more than being whole. They stopped asking, "What do I need?" and started asking, "What do they want from me?" And when you live in that question long enough, you don't even recognize what you actually feel anymore. There was a woman, older, brilliant, full of softness, who once told me she hadn't said no to anyone in 20 years. Not to her husband, not to her children, not even to a friend asking for help at midnight. "They need me," she said. But when I asked her what she needed, she cried. Not because she didn't know, because no one had asked her that in decades, not even herself. You betray yourself by becoming the version of you that makes others comfortable. That version isn't real. It's a costume. It smiles on cue. It agrees by default. It apologizes for existing too loudly. This betrayal is quiet. It's rarely dramatic. It feels like maturity. It sounds like responsibility. But what it really is forgetting. Forgetting who you were before you became everyone's solution. They love that version of you, the helpful one, the one who's always fine. But they don't see the cost, because you never show them the invoice. You pay in silence, in postponed dreams, in swallowed opinions, and when resentment builds, you scold yourself. "I should be grateful." That's the final layer of betrayal, feeling guilty for wanting something for yourself. You convince yourself that being needed is enough, that approval is love, that comfort is safety. But deep down, there's a part of you that's screaming, and you've taught it to whisper. Eventually, you hit a wall, not because anyone hurt you, but because you finally realize you've been hurting yourself to keep others happy. That's when the anger comes, not at them, at you, for knowing better, but still shrinking, for feeling the red flags, but still staying, for being so afraid of being too much that you became almost nothing. I've been there. You wake up one day and you're a stranger in your own life, a life you curated to avoid rejection, to avoid conflict, to avoid being alone. But all that avoidance didn't save you. It just delayed the collapse. You can't outrun the truth of who you are. You can mute it, dress it up, silence it for years, but it waits. And when it returns, it doesn't ask permission. It demands a reckoning. They didn't betray you. You did. Every time you abandoned yourself to earn their closeness. There's no applause loud enough to fill the silence of a life lived for others. Self-betrayal is the only lie you can't unhear once the truth returns. What comes next is not about silence. It's about the moment you finally speak. But no one listens because they only learn to love your silence. That moment changes everything. There comes a moment when the silence you've lived in becomes unbearable, not loud, not dramatic, just unbearable. You sit across from someone you once loved, maybe a friend, a parent, a partner, and for the first time in years, you decide to be honest, completely. No filters, no softeners, no rehearsed lines, just truth. And they blink. They smile nervously. They change the subject. They say, "That's not how I remember it." That's when it hits you. They never really knew you. They knew your service, your silence, your smile, but not you. It's the most painful realization. Not that people hurt you, but that you trained them to misunderstand you. You stayed quiet when you should have spoken. You smiled when it was easier than disappointing them. You downplayed your pain until even you forgot how deep it went. So now, when you finally speak, when your voice trembles with things you've held for years, they call it overreacting. No one tells you how lonely truth can be when you say it too late. I've watched it happen again and again. The daughter who finally says, "That wasn't love, that was control." The employee who stands up and says, "This isn't respect. This is exploitation." The woman who whispers, "I'm not okay." And the response is always the same: confusion, resistance, denial. Because when you've built your relationships on being easy, quiet, dependable, your truth feels like betrayal, not to you, but to them. They loved the version of you that didn't need much, that didn't question the dynamic, that never held up a mirror. So when you finally show your reflection, they flinch. You think speaking will free you, and it does, but not in the way you hoped. It doesn't bring applause, it doesn't bring comfort, it brings distance. And here's the hardest part. That distance is what finally makes room for peace. Because peace was never going to come from being understood by people committed to misunderstanding you. Peace comes when you choose self-respect over connection, when you stop begging to be seen and start standing in your own clarity, even if it costs you company. There's grief in that, real, aching grief. You'll miss people who never actually saw you. You'll mourn relationships that only existed in one direction. You'll question if you made it all up, if it was really that bad, if maybe you should have kept pretending. But one morning, you'll wake up, and the weight will be gone. Not all of it, but enough. Enough to breathe without flinching. Enough to stop apologizing for needing something real. That's the turning point. Not when others change, but when you finally stop asking them to. Don't confuse silence with peace. Sometimes silence is just a cage with soft walls. The first time you speak your truth, it won't feel like freedom. It will feel like loss. But keep going. If they only loved you quiet, they never loved you whole. One chapter remains. The ending isn't a solution. It's a decision, a new kind of silence, the one you choose, not the one you're forced into. This silence is different. It doesn't ache. It doesn't scream. It doesn't echo the voices of people you used to shrink for. It feels like standing barefoot on your own floor after years of walking on tiptoe, like hearing your own breath and realizing you were never too much. You were just surrounded by people who wanted less. There's no applause in this ending, no crowd, no dramatic closure, only space. And in that space, you hear something you haven't heard in a long time, yourself. You no longer explain. You no longer perform. You no longer translate your pain into polite phrases. And the world adjusts. Some people leave. Others stay confused. A few try to come back, not to you, but to the version of you they miss, the agreeable, edited one. But that version is gone, buried, respectfully, without resentment. You don't need revenge. You don't need justice. You don't even need understanding. What you need, and finally choose, is clarity. You start saying no without guilt. You choose your peace over their comfort. You let others misunderstand you because you've stopped negotiating your soul for their approval. And what a relief it is to stop auditioning, to stop justifying your joy, your solitude, your boundaries, to live without the constant pressure to soften your edges so others don't cut themselves on your truth. For the first time, your silence isn't heavy. It's clean. It's yours. Not the silence of suppression, but the silence of wholeness. Not everyone will notice. Some will say, "You've changed." Others will say, "You've become distant, cold, arrogant." Let them. People mistake your healing for hostility when they've only known your wounds. You're not unkind. You're just no longer willing to betray yourself to make others comfortable. That's not bitterness. That's self-respect. That's not cruelty. That's clarity. That's not pride. That's finally coming home. I won't lie to you. The loneliness doesn't vanish. It changes shape. It becomes cleaner, quieter, less about being unwanted, more about choosing peace over noise. And somewhere in that stillness, you begin to meet new people, not many, but the right ones. People who don't flinch at your honesty, who don't shrink when you expand, who sit with your silence without trying to fill it. You'll learn that being seen by fewer people is better than being half seen by many. You'll remember that the love you were starving for was never supposed to come from outside. And in that moment, not loud, not grand, you'll realize you didn't lose your life. You reclaimed it. You don't owe anyone the version of you that kept them comfortable. Let them misunderstand you. You're not responsible for their illusions. The final kind of peace isn't about being liked. It's about no longer needing to be. And maybe, just maybe, this is what healing sounds like. Not loud, not perfect, just honest. And finally, yours.